Washington, where any moment we'll hear from outgoing Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was just fired. Today, Donald Trump said he is getting what he wants.
I'm really at a point where we're getting very close to having the cabinet and other things that I want. But I think Mike Pompeo will be a truly great Secretary of State. I have total confidence in him. And as far as Rex Tillerson is concerned, I very much appreciate his commitment and his service, and I wish him well. He's a good man.
As we said today, the President of the United States fired his own Secretary of State in a tweet. Replacing Tillerson is CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Replacing Pompeo is Deputy Director of the CIA, Gina Haspel. That is, if they get confirmed. Tillerson is just the latest in a series of high-profile departures at the White House, many coming after high-profile policy disagreements from the president. Hello, Gary Cohn. What do we take away from all of this? Well, exactly what you heard the president say himself a moment ago. Donald Trump is getting what he wants. And what he wants seems to be exactly what he said on the campaign trail, from foreign policy to trade.
I don't know if you've been seeing what's going on with Iran. They violated the agreement already. I mean, it is a few days after all. They violated one of the worst deals I've ever seen negotiated at any level.
This is the dumbest agreement I think I've ever seen.
If I become president, I'm going to renegotiate our trade deals because our trade deals are not sustainable by this country.
Drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. We are going to renegotiate our terrible trade deals.
In Pompeo, he gets his Iran hawk, and Austin Cohn, he gets a clear road to dismantling trade deals around the world. In Gina Haspel, he gets someone with a hardline past on terrorism and torture, which, if you were following the campaign, you'll remember Donald Trump wants.
Would I approve waterboarding? You bet your ass I'd approve it.
When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives, don't kid yourself. But they say they don't care about their lives. You have to take out their families.
Which leads us to our big question. What else is Donald Trump getting out of this shakeup, and what more could come? Again, the now outgoing Secretary of State will be briefing reporters on camera in just a moment. It should be interesting. But first, let's get to our reporters and experts. Chris Matthew, host of Hardball, is here with me. Chris, I'm going to start with you before we get to everybody else. What do you think is happening right now? Is this a president now deciding just that he's going to do things his own way, no matter what?
Well, you know, he wants to have everyone understand that he's the boss. There's no one around him. There's no team of rivals. There's no associates or consiglieres. It's him. I mean, he did it in the campaign. Remember how he was upset that people were giving Steve Bannon credit for the campaign you covered? He didn't want anybody getting credit, his so-called strategist. The same with economic policy. He didn't want Gary Cohn involved with it. He wanted to have protectionism, and that's the way it was. Get rid of Cohn. He's gone. And now he wants to be the leader of the free world. He doesn't want anybody as a foreign minister, as Secretary of State. It's all going to be him. I think that the scary thing about this, of course, is he did campaign on a couple of things, and one of them was no stupid wars. What's the alternative to the Iranian nuclear deal? What's the alternative? They continue making nuclear weapons. They go back on what they were doing, and then we go to war with them? I mean, that really is the dangerous part of this. If he goes with Pompeo to a hawkish position on Iran, what's that going to look like? That looks to me like a stupid war in the works.
Well, this was what people were worried about when the administration was coming in, right before the inauguration, when they were figuring out who was going to be in which cabinet position. And while Mike Flynn was still the NSA, there was real concern that Iran was going to be in the crosshairs. All of these Iran hawks who agreed with Donald Trump about ripping up that deal, who did not trust Iran. There was concern that the first headline they'd see out of this administration would be Donald Trump confronts Iran and starts something. So can we take this as Pompeo, as Donald Trump now deciding that he doesn't care what his diplomats say, he doesn't care what lawmakers say, he doesn't care what we may have said in the past, that this is a pretty clear indication that that Iran deal is going to get ripped up?
Yeah, and, you know, the Iran deal wasn't like telling somebody at a counter what you want on your hamburger. It was the deal we could get with all of our partners in the world. It was a multilateral deal with the world. That's the only way you could do sanctions. And it was the deal we could cut with all those people around the world, the Germans, everybody else. And it worked. And if he pulls out, there will still be some sort of sanction, I suppose, but they'll start building rockets again. They'll start putting their nuclear program on track. And then what we do, what Netanyahu wants us to do, go to war.
So we won't
he
just
said
have
no stupid wars.
So we won't
and
just
this
have
one looks
North
like a
Korea
stupid war.
with nuclear weapons. We
At
could
the same
potentially
thing.
have.
And by the way, what kind of a deal is he going to cut with Kim Jong-un? Maybe it's as good as the Iran deal. Who thinks it's going to be better? They already have nuclear weapons. Unlike the Iranians, they already got them. So whatever we have will be in the face of the fact that they've got a nuclear program to start with. It can't be better than the Iranian deal. They don't have nuclear weapons. So I think he's got a real problem here.
Chris, where does this position come from, this anti-Iran position? Is this just because this was a deal, a landmark deal that President Obama signed and negotiated in his administration?
I don't know whether it's his contributors, supporters. Why do we move the embassy? This hawkish neocon position is what he ran against. He said, we're not going to be like W was. We're not going around sporting around the Middle East talking a freedom agenda, looking to engage in regime change. We're not going to do that anymore. That's not good for our country. And here he is.
Again,
basically restarting the fight with Iran while he's got a fight going with North Korea already.
Tillerson's going to come out in a moment. We played a couple other moments from the campaign off the top of this show, other things that Donald Trump wanted. And we're seeing, there's no TPP. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords. Right. He's getting his wall built. He's visiting it today when he's in California. Everything he said on the campaign trail, which seemed outrageous at the time and impossible at the time, he seems to be getting or on his way to getting in this administration. There were other moments that stood out to me, and then waterboarding was one of them, Chris. He said this repeatedly on the campaign trail,
right.
that waterboarding didn't go far enough, that he would do that, and worse, Gina Haspel has a real history with enhanced interrogation in the CIA.
I think anybody who's ever been in the military is against torture because it's the old question, do you want our enemies to do what we do to other people? We don't want to get in the business of torture. And I have to tell you, I want to go back over something. A lot of reasonable people, not a lot, but some voted for Trump because he said, I'm going to stop all these stupid wars, which was something he was talking against his own party's record in Afghanistan and Iraq. No more trying to topple dictators. We're not doing that anymore. It's not in our interest. And the other thing he promised he has never done was to rebuild America. And whether you have to go to Erie, Pennsylvania, where else where the bridges are falling apart, he gave that money away to his rich friends instead of rebuilding. And that was a betrayal. So I think the two things that some reasonable people liked about his campaign, no more stupid wars and rebuild America first, not spend our money overseas, he's not doing. Okay, he's doing torture. Who's that benefit?
Chris,
it's not benefiting the voters in Erie. And by the way, it's not going to help them get elected anywhere in Pennsylvania.
I mean, it might not be benefiting them in actual practice, but that was one of the lines, Chris, that got the biggest applause and the loudest cheers wherever we were on the campaign trail, north, south, east, west. It didn't matter. Donald Trump supporters cheered that on. They wanted somebody who was going to be tough, despite the fact that he said he wasn't going to be involved. I mean, he contradicted himself left and right.
Look, I think torture is immoral, and I think it's going to be seen as immoral. We're not going to do it. The military guys like John McCain, those who really did face the enemy and faced capture and imprisonment, no, we don't get in that business again.
Chris, let's talk about Tillerson real fast. What could he possibly come out and say?
Well, he has a right to be angry because the Secretary of State is a hugely important position in our history. It goes back to Jefferson. He's Secretary of State, and he got fired by tweet. Why doesn't Trump have the whatever it takes to meet these people, whether it's Priebus or anybody else he's going to fire, and do it to their face? Why did he fire Comey by remote? He did it when he's in California. Why did he call him in and say, you've done a great job. I just want to go a different direction on Iran. I have to ask for your resignation.
Well, it could be
That's
because
the way
Tillerson
a gentleman does it. It's the way a
moron.
man does it. Huh?
What do you think? It could be because Tillerson called him a moron.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring that up, but that was a year ago, and I thought ever since he said that, this guy was cooked. I agree. You think like I do, Katie. I mean, you're right, exactly. He wasn't going to live with a guy who called him a moron, but you know what? Then he gets into the IQ test fisting. He wanted to take an IQ test and compare his results with Tillerson.
Yeah.
He also went after the IQ of a congresswoman from California this week. He has this IQ
projector.
thing.
He's a projector.
Yeah, it's
Chris.
very strange.
Everything
but by the way, it's bad
him,
form.
He says about you, I'm rubber and you're glue.
Well, okay, here's the thought. When he had frog legs with Romney, remember that one?
Yeah.
We all watched it and we said, oh, what we're doing here is making fun of Romney, make this upper class guy beg for a job and then pull it out from under him, humiliate him. Just think how good Mitt Romney feels today that he's not being put through this humiliation, because this is what faced him, this kind of tenure ending. and he's now doesn't have to, he can watch somebody else go through it. And he's going to be a senator from Utah.
We will see how Mitt Romney reacts in real time once if he is elected to Utah Senate. We'll see if he actually comes out.
Well, he's waiting for 2020. We know that. He's waiting for 2020.
Really? You think again? You think again?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an opening. A lot of people think it'll be an opening. Yeah.
Stick around for us. We got a few other reporters who are hoping to jump in. If you can, stick with us. We'd like to come back to you. NBC's Peter Alexander is at the White House. NBC's Garrett Hake is on Capitol Hill. Also joining us, NBC News national political reporter Carol Lee and White House reporter for The Washington Post, who broke the news of Tillerson's departure, Ashley Parker. Peter, I want to start with you. How did this go down?
Well, let's walk you through at least a couple phone calls that we know took place between the chief of staff here at the White House, John Kelly, and Rex Tillerson, dating back to this past Friday. The first call to Tillerson from the chief of staff coming Friday here early Saturday morning in Africa, where Tillerson was effectively doing an apology tour on behalf of the president for the S-hole comment the president used about African nations only a matter of months ago. At the time, Tillerson, we are told, according to White House officials, effectively being told by the chief of staff that the president wanted him to, quote, step aside. Then we understand, according to officials here, there was a separate phone call that took place Saturday, in effect saying that that Tillerson's ouster was, quote, imminent. Recognized that Rex Tillerson didn't land back in the States until the wee hours, overnight, early this morning, and it was only a matter of hours after that we understand that he officially got the word that he was being fired by the president's tweet this morning announcing that his new selection for Secretary of State, the nominee, would be the CIA director, Mike Pompeo. Katie.
And what you're hearing in the background, I believe, is one of the reporters in that briefing room giving a live report. I think that's
it's a busy one here.
We're just getting word that Rex Tillerson is walking down the hall to that podium. Ashley, quickly to you, and we're going to have to cut you off if he shows up, but the White House has now also fired the undersecretary who released the statement saying Tillerson was surprised by the firing, which the White House contradicted. Ashley, you know what? Hold on that, because Rex Tillerson is now there.
Good afternoon, all. I received a call today from the President of the United States at a little after noontime from Air Force One. And I've also spoken to White House Chief of Staff Kelly to ensure we have clarity as to the days ahead. What is most important is to ensure an orderly and smooth transition during a time that the country continues to face significant policy and national security challenges. As such, effective at the end of the day, I'm delegating all responsibilities of the Office of the Secretary to Deputy Secretary of State Sullivan. My commission as Secretary of State will terminate at midnight, March the 31st. Between now and then, I will address a few administrative matters related to my departure and work towards a smooth and orderly transition for Secretary of State designate Mike Pompeo. I'm encouraging my policy planning team and undersecretaries and assistant secretaries, those confirmed, as well as those in acting positions, to remain at their post and continue our mission at the State Department and working with the interagency process. I will be meeting members of my front office team and policy planning later today to thank them for their service. They have been extraordinarily dedicated to our mission, which includes promoting values that I view as being very important. The safety and security of our State Department personnel, accountability, which means treating each other with honesty and integrity, and respect for one another. Most recently, in particular, to address challenges of sexual harassment within the department. I want to speak now to my State Department colleagues and to our interagency colleagues and partners at DOD and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, most particularly. To my Foreign Service officers and civil service colleagues, we all took the same oath of office. Whether you're a career, employee, or political appointee, we are all bound by that common commitment to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully discharge the duties of our office. As a State Department, we are bound together by that oath. We remain steadfast here in Washington and at posts across the world, many of whom are in danger-pay situations without their families. The world needs selfless leaders like these, ready to work with long-standing allies new emerging partners and allies who now, many are struggling as democracies, and in some cases are dealing with human tragedy, crisis of natural disasters, literally crawling themselves out of those circumstances. These are experiences that no lecture hall in an academic environment or at a think tank can teach you. Only by people going to the front lines to serve can they develop this kind of talent. To the men and women in uniform, I'm told for the first time in most people's memory, the Department of State and Department of Defense have a close working relationship where we all agree the U.S. leadership starts with diplomacy. The men and women in uniform at the Department of Defense, under the leadership of Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, protect us as Americans and our way of life daily, at home and abroad. As an all-volunteer military, they do it for love of country, they do it for you, and they do it for me, and for no other reason. As Americans, we are all eternally grateful to each of them, and we honor their sacrifices. The rewarding part of having leadership and partnerships in place is that you can actually get some things done. And I want to give recognition to the State Department and our partners for a few of their accomplishments under this administration. First, working with allies, we exceeded the expectations of almost everyone with the DPRK Maximum Pressure Campaign. With the announcement on my very first trip as Secretary of State to the region that the era of strategic patience was over, and we commenced the steps to dramatically increase not just the scope, but the effectiveness of the sanctions. The department undertook a global campaign to bring partners and allies on board in every country around the world, with every embassy and mission raising this to the highest levels. And at every meeting I've had throughout the year, this has been on the agenda to discuss. The adoption of the South Asia strategy with a conditions-based military plan as the tool to compel the Taliban to reconciliation and peace talks with the Afghan government finally equipped our military planners with a strategy which they can execute as opposed to a succession of 16 one-year strategies. This clear military commitment attracted the support of allies broadly and equipped our diplomats with a whole new level of certainty around how to prepare for the peace talks and achieve the final objectives. In other areas, while progress has been made, much work remains. In Syria, we did achieve important ceasefires and stabilizations, which we know has saved thousands of lives. There's more to be done in Syria, particularly with respect to achieving the peace, as well as stabilizing Iraq and seeing a healthy government installed, and more broadly in the entire global campaign to defeat ISIS. Nothing is possible without allies and partners, though. Much work remains to establish a clear view of the nature of our future relationship with China. How shall we deal with one another over the next 50 years and ensure a period of prosperity for all of our peoples, free of conflict between two very powerful nations? And much work remains to respond to the troubling behavior and actions on the part of the Russian government. Russia must assess carefully as to how its actions are in the best interest of the Russian people and of the world more broadly. Continuing on their current trajectory is likely to lead to greater isolation on their part, a situation which is not in anyone's interest. So to my colleagues in the State Department and the interagency, much remains to be done to achieve our mission on behalf of the American people, with allies and with partners. I close by thanking all for the privilege of serving beside you for the last 14 months. Importantly, to the 300+ million Americans, thank you for your devotion to a free and open society, to acts of kindness towards one another, to honesty and the quiet hard work that you do every day to support this government with your tax dollars. All of us, we know, want to leave this place as a better place for the next generation. I'll now return to private life as a private citizen, as a proud American, proud of the opportunity I've had to serve my country. God bless all of you. God bless the American people. God bless America.
Secretary of State walking out without taking questions. The now outgoing Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, says he will now return to private life as a private American citizen, proud of serving his country. That was a remarkable outgoing statement by Rex Tillerson. He said that effective at the end of the day, he will be handing over the reins to the Deputy Secretary of State, Sullivan. Back with me, Chris Matthews, host of Hardball here on MSNBC. We also had Peter Alexander at the White House, Carol Lee, and Ashley Parker. Chris, first to you. What I got from that right there was not only was it diplomatic, but at the end, he snuck in a warning to Russia.
Well, he also never mentioned Donald Trump, the president he served, at once. Not once did he mention him.
Good point.
He came in there out of breath, as if he had just been knocked out of office. He looked exactly what he's going through. He looked like the guy going through what he's going through, abruptly dethroned from a prestigious position he thought he owned. The president didn't do it to his face. He apparently called him, he just said a few hours ago, to make sure he knew it. But that was sort of a coup de grace more than a call to him to resign. And I thought it was interesting. He tried to win goodwill with the Department of State people and the Defense Department people. He has not had a great relationship with the rank and file in the State Department. He has not even used it, really. The ambassadors, when he's go to visit countries, he didn't even meet with them or bring them along with him to meetings. So it wasn't a great relationship. But that's not interesting to most people. The interesting thing is the president seemed to have done this in an abrupt way. It sounds like more's coming from what he said in the driveway, that he's almost back to the kind of cabinet he wants, which is people who agree with him.
Ashley.
And clearly that's what he wants.
Ashley, more to come. What could that possibly be?
That could be any number of things. We're hearing that McMaster's days are numbered. I believe that's something you guys first reported a couple of weeks ago. And the broader thing, rather than naming specifics, is that we're hearing from inside the White House that this is a president unleashed and unchained and sort of doing what he wants. So if there is someone he has been frustrated with, as he has been almost since Rex Tillerson first joined his administration, now is the time when he is going to make these changes. He feels emboldened. And secondly, as he's already started making some of these changes, there are less and less people around him who are the sorts of people who, when he, talked or mused about firing Rex Tillerson or talked or mused about firing someone else, would sort of talk him down or delay him or distract him.
Yeah.
So this is just the moment where he's sort of looking for an overhaul and is emboldened and empowered to do it.
Carol, what did you make, though, of that last moment where he gave a very clear warning to Russia that they should consider what is in their best interest? Rex Tillerson has been one of the few people in this administration that will go out on a limb against Russia. There's a couple others that have. Pompeo is one of them. Same with Nikki Haley. But certainly from the Oval Office, from the West Wing, we haven't heard a lot of speak like that.
Yeah, it struck me, too, because it's one of the things that the president and Secretary Tillerson disagreed on. And one of the things that really frustrated President Trump was when Rex Tillerson would take a line on Russia that would put the White House and the president in the spotlight of seeming softer on Russia or not as tough. I thought the most interesting thing that came out of there is that the only mention he made of the president was to say that he spoke with him on the phone from Air Force One this afternoon. At the end, when he thanked people for the honor to serve, he thanked the State Department and he thanked the American people, and he did not thank President Trump. And that, going into this, you're looking at, is he going to say anything about the president or take a jab at him in some way? And I think what happened here is in what he didn't say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was, if you look at it, the way people are looking at it, this was a real slap in the face to Rex Tillerson to be fired in a tweet and then be called by the president when he was aboard Air Force One. Not just that, Peter, but the undersecretary who released a statement saying that he was surprised by this, that Rex Tillerson was surprised by this, has also been fired by the White House. An indication that if you're not on board with the way the White House is running things or what the White House says, if it contradicts what you say, then you are gone.
Yeah, the shakeups continue across Washington in effect today. But Katie, you know what really strikes me on this day is the fact that this is a president who became so familiar to Americans for his role on The Apprentice, where he sat there in the boardroom and he looked at individuals and to their face he said, "You're fired." And yet the high-profile firings have taken place from thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
James Comey. The situation today with Rex Tillerson, where in effect he got a couple of calls from the chief of staff over the last several days, and then only after a tweet did he hear from the president while the president was flying out to California aboard Air Force One. It was striking to hear Tillerson talk about his desire to participate in what he described as an orderly and smooth transition, given the fact that despite the president's insistence that this is a fine-tuned machine here at the White House. Earlier, you played that long list of departures. It's been anything but orderly, the transitions that have taken place here with, as you just reported, the anticipation that there may be more to come. What we haven't even addressed today is one of the president's inner circle members, one of those physically, literally and figuratively closest to the president, John McEntee, the president's personal aide, we now know was forced to depart, literally escorted off the premises just yesterday. This is the president's personal aide, his body man, one of the guys who was with him from the very beginning, as you know well, alongside Keith Schiller, effectively the president's bodyguard, Hope Hicks, who's now announced that she's resigning, and NBC News has now confirmed, according to a series of law enforcement officials, that McEntee is currently being investigated for what are being described as serious financial crimes.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that indicates that this has been anything but orderly behind the scenes, even as the president would like to say, hey, this is exactly as I like it to look. I'm struck by what he said on the South Lawn when we saw him today, basically saying, I'm finally getting to that place where I think I have the cabinet and the other officials I want. As you know well, he said he only hires the best people. Well, if that's the case, you wouldn't think they'd have to be leaving so often. And
we just showed a picture of John McEntee. If you watch this show, if you watch the campaign, you'd recognize him. He was on the bottom right-hand screen, a young guy who's been with the campaign since almost the very beginning, as Peter was just saying. We have Andrea Mitchell, who was in that briefing. Unfortunately, we just lost Andrea Mitchell, almost got her, who was in the briefing with Secretary of State, outgoing Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Chris Matthews, you know what? We got Andrea Mitchell back. I'm sorry, Chris. Hold on a second. Andrea, give us your top lines from that briefing.
Well, he was fired. He was fired precipitously. He had a terrible tenure here from the State Department's perspective, not filling vacancy, cutting the budget 30% each year. But the way he was fired and the fact that he was much closer to Defense Secretary Mattis and in sync with European allies and others around the world in terms of a more traditional diplomacy, which arguably is a much better strategic outlook for the United States, means we're going to have big changes. They do not know whether Mike Pompeo, a very smart man with a much better relationship with the president, who can advocate for the State Department, will speak up to the president, will talk back to him, especially he and other cabinet members now know, assuming that Pompeo is confirmed, they all know what happened to Rex Tillerson for speaking back. Look, Rex Tillerson as the CEO of ExxonMobil was never a good fit. He was from the private sector, which has happened before, but he not only had no diplomatic experience, but he talked down to the president. He patronized the president. Famously, he called him a moron on July 20th at the Pentagon. It was overheard by enough advisors that we heard about it and reported on that in the fall. And then he refused to lie and say that it hadn't happened. He simply dismissed the questions about it as recently as a week ago. So this man was honest. He wouldn't lie. He talked back to the President of the United States in ways that others did not and still do not. He did not believe in blowing up the Iran nuclear deal, but modifying it, fixing it if possible, so that they would not be sending a signal to North Korea and rogue players elsewhere in the world that doing a deal with the United States of America means that you cannot trust that it will be obeyed and lived up to. Very important as we're going into negotiations with North Korea.
Yeah.
He was one of the original advocates, as you know, Katie, of diplomacy with North Korea, and then was undercut famously on Twitter again as he was flying back from Asia when the president tweeted, "You're wasting your time, Rex. Don't waste your time, Rex." So he didn't have the respect of others. He was others around the world because they knew he didn't speak for the president. That as well, he was upset after Charlottesville. He's an Eagle Boy Scout who hated that Boy Scout speech last summer that the president profanely gave to the Boy Scouts of America at the Jamboree. I mean, there are so many ways in which this man was not a good fit with this president, but was, you could argue, a much better advocate for what the United States needs to do in the world. And we do not know whether Mike Pompeo, a really smart guy, first in his class at Harvard, West Point graduate, will have the backbone to stand up to the president.
That's the question, Andrea. And Donald Trump is now just touching down in San Diego. We'll see if reporters can get anywhere near him once he gets off the plane. I don't think so. Andrea, that is the question, though. Will Mike Pompeo change Donald Trump on foreign policy, or will Donald Trump change Mike Pompeo on foreign policy? He's been very outspoken against Russia. He's called WikiLeaks a state sponsor, or I forgot the exact terminology, but he basically said WikiLeaks is not a friend. It's not a journalism organization, as Roger Stone wants to put it. Who's going to have more influence on whom? Is it going to be Pompeo or Trump?
Pompeo is a former member of Congress and a very smart one. He's a major player on the Benghazi hearings. He is a politician, as well as having done a very good job, arguably, by all reports at the CIA. So there are two things here. He understands public advocacy. He will be much better at speaking in public, at doing television interviews, at talking to the press corps when it's a good purpose for the United States of America to travel with the press corps, as Rex Tillerson did not until very, very recently. So in that regard, I think as a former politician and not a former CEO of the world's largest private company, he is a better fit. But whether he is going to be able to influence the president remains to be seen. He has spent more time with the president than anyone else over these 14 months because he has been the briefer, presenting the president's daily brief in person, in contrast to many of his predecessors who would send a deputy. He did it mostly in person, and because this president does not read the daily brief in full, it was done verbally. So they have a very good chemistry.
Yeah.
He'll also, of course, if she is confirmed, have his former deputy, who's very highly regarded by the professionals, if not by some of her critics on Capitol Hill, at the CIA. So, I mean, I think it is a mixed record here, but I think the profound sense of chaos, and it's only the beginning because we heard from the president himself that there could be more changes this week. You don't know what's going to happen with H.R. McMaster. There's going to be a choice to replace Gary Cohn. By the way, Tillerson, it wasn't just, it could be Larry Kudlow, indeed. They've talked twice, at least according to reports. Look, on the Paris Climate Accords, on Iran and the nuclear deal, on moving the embassy to Jerusalem, as precipitously as the White House decided to do it, on North Korean diplomacy before the president had finally adopted that point of view. On all of these major issues, Rex Tillerson was more in line with the rest of the world than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The problem is he was not in line with his commander-in-chief.
Mike Pompeo called WikiLeaks a hostile intelligence service, just to be clear on that. Andrea Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.